Hello everybody, Andrew Blake from the digitalaudiomanual.com. Today we move on to our second video as we continue discussing the modulation matrix in Retrologue. In our last video we dug into the source and the destination areas down here in this modulation matrix. Specifically we worked with an example of using the LFO1 to affect the cutoff. That stuff makes no sense. You're going to want to go back and watch that first video. But assuming you understand that basic concept, let's go a little deeper now. If we do like we did in the last video, we drag the LFO1 from the 3 lines up to the cutoff, which now gives us the basic effect of the LFO controlling the cutoff. And we vary the depth a bit. The new thing we want to understand now is what's the difference when we go all the way to the right with this depth slider as opposed to going all the way to the left. If we hold our mouse over it, we get a little tooltip that says -100. If we go all the way to the right, we get a tooltip that says 100. And if we hold Control and click it in the middle, we have 0. So what's the difference between going all the way to 100 on the right or -100 on the left? When you listen to it, it's almost identical in the way it sounds. If I go all the way to the right, or I go all the way to the left, it seems to be doing almost the same thing. You can't really tell the difference until you hear this with the tempo of your track matched with something. If I start a basic drum loop playing in the background, and I hold a single note, I move this depth slider all the way to the right. For my example, I'm going to turn the sync mode on. I'm going to set this retrigger to each one. You can hear now how the timing goes with the beat. On the other hand, if I take this depth slider and I move it all the way to the left, and I hold the note with the beat, you can hear it's almost side-chained or off the beat. On the right, it hits right on the beat. On the left, it hits off the beat. It's happening when we use this right or left side of the depth because we're controlling this cutoff knob up here. What we're really doing is saying, do we want to turn this knob from the right side down to the left? Or do we want to start our note from the left side and move it to the right? Or basically coming from no value to maximum value and vice versa from maximum value to no value. The difference is you're going to get this kind of a sound. When it's coming from the maximum value to the minimum, you get this. But when it's coming from the minimum value to the maximum, you get this. So again, if I play my drum beat and I hold the note down and then I take the depth and go all the way to the right and then go all the way to the left. So understanding that the farther we go to the right or the farther we go to the left, what we're telling this knob, we want to turn it just a little bit like this, or do we want to turn it the whole length of the knob? Either starting from the left side to the right, or same thing on the right side, maybe turn it just a little bit like that, or do we want it to go the full length of the knob going that way? Each one is going to give you a different effect. A little bit of the turn, or a maximum turn. Or coming from the other way, a little bit of a turn, or a lot of the turn. Now, taking it a step further. So far we've been dealing with the full length of this value on this cutoff knob. In other words, from the maximum to the minimum or vice versa. But what if we wanted to scale it down? For example, maybe we want just a little bit of this area here, not the whole length from left to right. But if you're thinking of a clock, maybe from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock up in the top area here. And then we wanted to move the full distance to that area. We want to restrict it just to this 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock area. Well, that's what this offset does. We haven't talked about this yet. But as we move this offset, again, either all the way to the right or the left or some variation, what we're doing is we're picking a specific area now on this knob, or it could be other controls that we're going to explore here soon. We're saying instead of the whole length of the knob, it's taking a certain area and basically restricting the area, the movement within that short space. So for example, if I went from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock on this knob, I would have this kind of a sound. You can hear how that's a lot different than if I go the whole length of the knob. And that's what happens when I start moving this offset. Right now I'm not using it, and I get the whole length of the knob, the sound of it. But as I start moving this offset, begin choking down on how much of the value is available to move within. If I move this depth knob to the other direction, I basically have to use the offset in the different direction to hear any effect. So again, if I was to play this with the beat, then change my offset now, or change my depth the other way. And then the last option in the set of actions here, we have a slot that says Modifier. And again, if we click on this, this pretty much mimics everything that was in the source area. The LFO 1, 2, 3, and others we're going to explore here. What the modifier is doing is basically affecting the LFO before it gets to the destination. We're not going to go real deep on examples of that, but let me show you one to get started. If we continue with our example of the LFO in the source, running the destination of the cutoff, we can hear the LFO turning the cutoff back and forth. We then go to the modifier area and add LFO 2, for example. This LFO 2 is now modulating this LFO 1 before it begins affecting the cutoff. And you can get all kinds of crazy variations from this effect. The first thing that's going to happen is it's basically going to start to wobble. If I go to the LFO 2 page over here and start changing this frequency, it causes a drastic effect on this LFO before it even gets to starting to change the cutoff. So as we continue looking on our source drop-down list, we can see that we have 4 LFOs here. LFO 1, LFO 2, 3, and 4. We've been focusing mostly on this LFO 1, but are these all the same? We come back over into this modulation area and select LFO 1, and we look at the controls we've kind of been messing with a bit. In the middle here it says monophonic LFO, and if we hit LFO 2, again it says monophonic LFO. The controls are identical between the two of these, depending on whether you turn the sync on or off. But when we hit LFO 3, this wording changes to polyphonic LFO. And the same thing when we hit LFO 4. So far, pretty much all of these LFOs behave exactly the same. One thing that does make a big difference, on our LFO 3 or 4, we also have this fade-in option. When I hold down a note, the minute I press the note, whatever the LFO is doing, and if I change these note values, any changes I make, I hear them immediately. If I go to this fade-in option, and it's measured in milliseconds, and we can take it all the way up to 5,000 milliseconds, which equates to 5 seconds. Let's say I dial in 3,000 milliseconds here. I click on it and hit the number 3,000, hit enter. When I hit the key now, you can hear that there's a pause before the LFO takes over. If we make this frequency more drastic, let's say a 30-second note, and I hit it again. So you can use this option to introduce vibrato or some kind of effect like that, and then have it come in after you've actually hit the note. Let's bump it up to 5,000 just to hear what it sounds like. I'll hit a note, and then you get an effect like that. All right, so let's move down the list a bit. If we go to our source, after our LFO 4, now we have the amp envelope. Before we select that, let's look at the amp envelope. If we go up into this area where it says amplifier, we have these sliders. The ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. When you use these just on a sound, for example, if I hit this sound, and I start changing the attack, it changes how it fades into the sound. If you look up here, you have a kind of a picture of what the wave does. This is your attack, here's your decay, here's your sustain, and then here's your release. The release is easy to hear too, because if I hit the key, it stops, but if I turn the release up, it rings out. And you can experiment with these and get different results. But because it's in the source option of our matrix, we can use this to modulate things as well. Let's stay with our cutoff and see what happens when we hit the amplifier envelope on it. I grab the 3 lines, drag them over the cutoff. I can see in the matrix it already filled it up with the amp envelope. Put the cutoff in the destination, move the depth. Now if I hit a key, basically I can use these sliders now to affect my sound. By changing the attack, I'm changing the attack on the cutoff. I can come down and adjust the depth or the offset and experiment away and get all kinds of different results. So some of the last things I want to mention today, there's various slots that we have down here. In this case, we have these 4 per page. And again, if I change the page, these numbers here, and I get 4 more. In essence, you can keep dragging source and destinations into each other able to auto-populate these slots like we've been doing. Let's say I go to LFO 1, drag it up to the cutoff. As we've been doing, it fills this slot number 1, showing the LFO and the cutoff. If I do it again, if I grab these 3 lines and drag it up to the cutoff, it immediately populates this slot 2, which again shows LFO and then cutoff. But the point is you can continue to build these modulations in the matrix. And every time you drag something in, or you can manually fill it in, it continues to populate another slot. Let's go ahead and drag one more here, do it again. Then when we do it the 5th time, it automatically changes to this page 2 and then begins the process over again of filling these slots. You can continue to do this up to 14 different times. And every time it reaches the end, it'll change the page and begin the process on the next page. When I finally get to the last page here, I have these 2 slots here. Then I have these last 2 that are kind of automatically filled in. That's just the default settings they have here. You can change these as well if you want to. Once all these slots are filled in, if you click and drag something and try to do it again, you'll just get an icon that says you can't do it. It won't overwrite anything for you, and it won't continue past anything you've already done. You can only fill in the slots that you have. But adding all these modulations certainly can give you the option of creating some very complicated sounds. And without going into detail today, you have multiple options as well. If you go back to your source and come down this list, you can assign buses. And in this case, you could send multiple of these LFOs to a particular bus, say bus 1 or 2 or whatever, and then you can reassign that bus into your destination and then choosing that one from the list. Now, I've been going back to the initial preset over and over during these tutorials. There's actually a context menu down here in this area. Depending on where you right-click, you'll either get this smaller menu that allows you to clear your modulation or to clear all the modulations. But then if you right-click in a different area, you have that option, plus your option to assign quick controllers, learn the quick controllers, or assign the modulation wheel. Let's go ahead and clear all our modulations. And then just like that, all the slots are empty again. So at this point, my recommendation for those that may be interested in this topic and are in some way intrigued by the idea of possibly building your own sounds in Retrologue or having the ability to customize your existing sounds, I would recommend for your next step is just to examine some of your presets. Now that you have the basic idea of how this modulation matrix flows through the signal, bring in a preset that you like the sound of, and now that you have some understanding of what's happening here, look at your modulation matrix and see if you can figure out how they've used it to actually customize the sound. How many slots is it using? What source? What destination is it using? Can you look up here now on the interface and have some idea of what they've actually done in that source and destination? And then don't be afraid to experiment and change some of your settings and see the difference. Or take those options and use them in your own sounds, fill in your own slots. The idea of sound design is a big topic. Even with our little Retrologue here, there's quite a universe of what's available and what's possible if you start digging in a little bit and playing with it. And we're going to leave it right there for today. Go make some great sounds and put them in your music. All right, it's going to wrap it up for today. As always, if you haven't already, click the link in the description of this video to learn how you can get access to the all-new Digital Audio Manual Preferred. It's the clear, step-by-step solution showing you not only the tips, but all the secret and typically never talked about features that'll take you to a higher level of using your software. If you've been searching for an all-in-one solution to take you from start to finish and learning Cubase and Wavelab and other music software, this is exactly what you've been looking for. So click on the link in the description and come and be part of the clear path to a better learning experience. So today we finished up taking our look at the modulation matrix of Retrologue. We got into the details of the depth slider, learned how to use the offset slider. We looked in a little more detail at the LFOs and some of their differences. Took a look at the amp envelope and how to use it in the matrix. We saw how we can fill out multiple slots in the modulation matrix. And then we finished off with learning in the context menu to help us clear out all the modules and some of the other great options available. And we'll continue to learn all these different features and functions in Cubase. As always, it's great to have you guys here, and I'll see you on the next video.